Thank you everyone for joining us. So we're here today because tomorrow it will be 1 year since London coroner Philip Barlow published a report on how to prevent future deaths like the death of 9-year-old Ella Deborah, who passed away in 2013. This followed the coroner's landmark finding that air pollution from the traffic around Ella's home on London's South Circular contributed to her severe asthma and death. Ella is the first person in the UK and possibly the world to have air pollution listed as a cause of death on her death certificate. The speakers here today are here today to talk about what the government is doing and crucially what it's not doing to follow the coroner's recommendations for preventing future deaths like Ella's. And this press conference is organised by the Ella Roberta Family Foundation and Hodge, Allen and Jones, with support from the Clean Air Fund. So we'll start first with brief opening remarks. First with Rosamond Adu-Kissi-Deborah, founder of the Ella Roberta Family Foundation, Breathe Life Ambassador, and Ella's mother.
I think for me, as I saw the reports beforehand, so I feel like the anniversary is actually already here of the coroner's recommendations. And I think when I go back to December the 16th, 2020, suddenly it seems such a long time ago. It really does. So much has happened, the Environment Act has been passed, the coroner's recommendations has come out, and now we are on to the consultation by the government. And ultimately, in a way, I still feel not much has changed. And what I mean by that is children still continue to die. That number hasn't gone down. The problem of air pollution hasn't been resolved. And looking at the latest consultation, I have no confidence that children aren't going to continue to die. So therefore, I was asked why is it important to keep on having things like for today's press conference? And I say the public need to be reminded of the detrimental impact of air pollution. And when you look at the second recommendation by the coroner, he did say there is generally a low awareness in regards to the impact of air pollution on public health. And I'm sure if we ask most people in the general public now, do they even know there's a consultation going on? I suppose most people would say no. So that's why I see days like today as extremely important. And I'm very grateful that Stephen, who was a key witness in the case, has made it here to obviously talk about what has happened since. So thank you. And also to Frank as well. And we will hear from both of them very shortly. So thank you very much for coming for today.
And Stephen Holgate is an air pollution expert at the University of Southampton and was the first to draw links between Ella's asthma attacks and air pollution on the South Circular.
Thank you very much. This is a very special day, being a year since Philip Barlow made his Prevention of Future Deaths report, because we have an opportunity to learn, I think, from the tragic history of Ella's short life, from which she died from asthma, with over 27 to 30 hospital admissions and many other very frightening attacks of asthma in her short period of 2.5 years while she was suffering from this disease. And I think what's important here, and I can't stress this enough, is that health, people's health, has to be put at the center of the argument, not at the periphery. Yes, of course, if we clean up the air, there are many other advantages that can flow from that. But it's gaining health that's the most important thing. And this is health across the entire life course, from when the baby is first conceived to when a person dies in older age, because air pollution affects people across the life course. Moreover, it affects some people worse than others. And of course, those that have pre-existing diseases, cardiac diseases, lung diseases, brain diseases are more susceptible. Babies and children are more susceptible. This is the greatest single environmental health risk to humans. And therefore we have to raise it up the profile in terms of what's important to create action for improving human health from these chronic diseases, including bronchial asthma. So my plea really is that we do become ambitious here, that we actually push the boundaries, and the UK uses its Brexit in a very positive way to improve the health of its population, recognizing that the health of its people has to be the number one priority within the country, over and above everything else. And of course, that requires bold and ambitious plans, and of course, people changing the way they behave in order to be able to comply with such plans. Thank you.
Thank you. And Guy Mitchell, a member of Rosamond's legal team during the 2020 inquest into Ella's death from Hodge, Allen and Jones.
Thank you. I think in reflecting on the Prevention of Death report, it's worth acknowledging the course of the inquest, the evidence that's had in the inquest, as to how the coroner got to making these recommendations. At the inquest, we heard that there was ample knowledge of the danger that air pollution caused, particularly to children, particularly for people living near main roads. And we also heard quite starkly about the government's failure to act. And whilst it had knowledge of these dangers, that it seemed intent on simply kicking the can down the road repeatedly, instead of taking action that could have saved lives. And the result was Ella's death and the death of thousands of others. In the Prevention of Death report, the coroner recognised that the prerequisite to future action needs to be science-based targets. Unfortunately, the government's response appears to be to not adopt science-based targets, to adopt out-of-date targets, and to kick the can down the road to almost 2 decades' time. And the result's going to be the same. Today, the knowledge of dangerous air pollution is even more stark. And it's unfortunate the government appears to be following the same course that led to the death of Ella and so many others.
And Frank Kelly, an air pollution expert at Imperial College London's new Global Centre on Air Pollution Research.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Rosamond for inviting me along today to partake in this event. This is an important day because it allows the story of Ella's untimely death to be retold again, and for us all to focus in on the reasons why that happened. And we know it's down to the poor air quality which she suffered during her short life, and the unfortunate issue is that we really haven't moved on from that situation. Back in 2005, the World Health Organization established a set of guidelines based on all the evidence that was present at that time. That's 27 years ago. Just back in a few months ago, in September 1921, those guidelines were updated and they were tightened. And that is because increasingly we have more and more evidence to put air pollution alongside poor health. And yet if we look at what's happened during those 27 years, it seems that we really haven't taken on board this important message. That really the quality of the air, one of the 3 essential things that we do as humans, we eat, we drink, and we breathe. And the quality of air that we take into our bodies is extremely important for predicting what our health consequences are going to be across the life course. So Ella didn't have that chance. She was maybe particularly susceptible to air pollution, but we know that's the case with many asthmatic children. And therefore, with that evidence, with that knowledge, and with the opportunity through the Environment Act. We have now the ability to improve the situation for other areas and for the rest of our community. And that's by setting an ambitious new air quality target. We've done work at Imperial, funded by the Clean Air Fund, which has demonstrated that we have the ability to meet much tighter targets than are being suggested by the government. With the funding put forward to do that, the health benefits which will be accrued will far outweigh the funding needed to improve air quality. So there is a real gain, both for us as individuals, for the UK as a country seem to be leading in this area, and for our health system, which is creaking at the seams often. We can stop treating disease and we can start preventing disease. Thank you.
Thank you. And so just for background, the government is now carrying out a public consultation on its air quality targets. The consultation started about a month ago and runs until May 11th. Frank, based on your research, what do you think about the government's proposed air quality targets, and what does your research show is achievable or a realistic but also ambitious goal?
Well, the government has indicated that it would like us to aim for an interim target for small particles, PM2.5, by 2040. The work that we have done at Imperial suggests that that target could be met much sooner. In fact, by 2030, 10 years sooner. And there would be only very small locations in our big cities where we may have exceedances. But we can identify where those would be, and with extra spend, with extra leeway to those local government bodies in those cities, those hotspots could be targeted as well. So I have no doubt that if we have the will, we have the way to deal with this problem.
And what difference would meeting that target 10 years earlier have on public health and also on cost?
It would have an enormous benefit to public health. If we take a disease like coronary artery disease, then we would have over 3,000 fewer episodes of coronary artery disease that the health service would have to deal with. We would have over 350,000 days where children do not have asthmatic events. Just think of the benefit that would be to those children and their education. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We would have many, many other benefits to our health system as well. From a cost point of view, we think that the government needs to spend about $3.5 billion a year to reach that target by 2030. But the accrued health benefits vastly outweigh that. They're about $350 billion. So it's a win-win situation for if those decisions are made now.
Thank you. And we will take questions too if anyone would like to ask one. Otherwise, I'll carry on. Rosamond, over the last year, you've been meeting national and local politicians, healthcare leaders, civil society. You went to COP26, and talking to a lot of people about the action needed following the coroner's findings. What have you heard, and what is your message today?
Well, I've had several meetings with the Secretary of State. I met him recently, and I'm glad Frank has clarified the research, because one of the things I queried about was the date of 2040, which is the target he has set. So I'm glad that's been clarified. I think ministers generally say to us, I think Stephen has been in on those meetings, that we have made the case for health. But my frustration is, when I look at the consultation, it doesn't appear that they are listening enough. I have requested several times to meet the Prime Minister, who I believe obviously is the most powerful person, and I believe he can have a lot of influence on this. At COP26, we did meet the President, Alok Sharma, and we put the case forward to him. We hope to have a follow-up meeting with him next month. Our message, the actual message we sort of gave to him is no more new fossil fuels, because I met Frank at COP, and one of the advice he gave me was that everything should stay in the ground, nothing should be burnt. So that was the message which I took. And also, I have made it very clear to every minister that I come in contact with that it's not that the public isn't ready, because they feel the public isn't ready for this. And I say to the government, what is needed is a public health campaign. And Stephen and I spoke about a public health campaign long before COVID. We met at Mayor Khan's event, and it was one of the things we were talking about before COVID happened. I think it's quite a bit to ask the public who find this topic very confusing indeed. And I believe that education is one of the keys going forward. And every opportunity that comes my way in every meeting, I have raised the fact that the government needs to fund a public health campaign. They haven't refused. I've got to be very honest with the public and say that. But I don't know whether they've said anything to you, Stephen. They haven't said to me personally that a public health campaign is likely to happen in the near future.
And Stephen, following up on that also, can you explain what did we learn from the coroner's Prevention of Future Deaths report a year ago, and why is it so significant in terms of what we know about air pollution, health, and what can be done about it?
I think one of the things that came out of the inquest was the fact that someone like Rosamond could sit through 10 days of really quite agonizing testimony about the death of her daughter and come out so positively in the way she has done, hence her appearance here today. What I learned from it was that being a specialist in lung disease and in asthma in particular over a lifetime really, was that air pollution hits individual human beings. So often it's just portrayed as something out there that influences general trends in one direction or another in health. But here we had an example of a young child at the peak of her development being taken away from this earth as a direct result of what we were putting into the air and what she was breathing. And I think it's the crystallization of that that really made this such an amazing case in some respects. In other respects, I think it's the appreciation on a worldwide stage, not just in the United Kingdom, that this was an extraordinary journey that Rosamond and her family have gone through. And I think any family who has a sick child knows how difficult it is to manage that family, let alone manage the child. This child, of course, was exceptionally sick. From an understanding of what's been going on, we've known air pollution causes asthma and other lung diseases to get worse for many, many years. One has just got to ask patients in an outpatient clinic about it. But it never is asked. And for some reason, out of sight, out of mind. So unlike allergy and unlike infections, which get a big headline, this gets no headline at all. And I think to some extent that is part of the problem here. It's an invisible, unpleasant, and insidious impact on human health. And I think what we have to do is to try and bring it into the light and make it real. And I think Ella's case is the one example that has set that trend going forwards. And I, from a medical professional standpoint, very much like now my colleagues, not only here in the UK, but around the world, to think about air pollution as a major cause and trigger of asthma, and to think of other examples that they can bring to the forefront that helps the public and the health professionals understand more how important this is. I'm quite certain that eventually changes will get made. But waiting another 20 odd years to be able to meet a deadline or a guideline that's set 27 years ago seems to me to be a retrogressive movement. We've got to be far more ambitious, and certainly the director of the World Health Organization, director of environmental health there, is very, very keen indeed that we are more ambitious, and we do not accept, no, we can't do it. We have a can-do attitude, and we can do it.
And just for background, so the coroner's prevention of future deaths report came out with 3 matters of concern, which are sort of the 3 steps that can be taken. The first being that the air pollution that Ella was breathing it exceeded WHO guidelines, and that meeting WHO guidelines would prevent many deaths. The next was the need for greater public awareness and more air pollution monitoring, and then also the need to educate medical bodies and healthcare professionals to recognize when their patients might be exhibiting symptoms from air pollution and to talk to their patients and carers about it. So those were the 3 matters of concern that went out to the national government, but also local councils, medical training bodies, and others. Guy, can you talk about the significance of the coroner's findings and how they're meant to influence government policy?
Yeah, so I mean, the finding of primary significance was that Ella's death was caused by air pollution, as has been said already, that was, as far as we know, the first time in the world that been recognised and hugely significant for that putting a face to the thousands of deaths we know do occur. And the prevention of future deaths report came about from the coroner's finding that the government had failed to take action in the lead up to Ella's death, despite the evidence of the danger of air pollution. And the significance of the prevention of future deaths report needs to be seen in that context. Prevention of future deaths reports are often produced in the case of in the case of a death which is perhaps unique or in very unique circumstances. And the coroners recognise there is a risk of future death, but the numbers of people whose lives are at risk is somewhat limited. In this case, the number of people's deaths that indicate are in the thousands. So, I mean, I think it creates a clear demand on the government to take action. There's a clear moral demand behind it that lives are at risk, and history risks repeating itself unless the government does take action.
And Rosamond, based on these findings, with the public consultation now out, what do you plan to say to the government regarding its proposal of meeting all WHO guidelines or interim targets by 2040?
I mean, it really is a bit of an insult to Ella's memory sometimes when I think about it, being her mother for all she suffered. And we need to remember the guidelines the government are talking about. They're talking about 2005 guidelines. They're not talking about the current guidelines. And what they are telling the British public is, we will meet the 2005 guidelines by 2040. And on my calculation, that is 35 years. And I try not to get emotional, obviously, because she's my daughter, but my concern is that it's not going to change life for an asthmatic child for today who lives by a very busy road and is still breathing, horrible toxic air. And already this year, I think we've had 2 warnings from the Mayor of London. So for those people who say the air is cleaner than ever before, if that was true, then the Mayor of London wouldn't have to bring out such a stern message. Basically, people who are vulnerable on high air pollution days, the actual message is for them not to go out and exercise or for them to stay indoors. And as I have said, this isn't a partisan issue at all. You know, clean air is political, but it's nothing to do with party politics at all. And I do have to commend the mayor for bringing in the ultra-low emission zone. I am relieved that he is going to be extending it. I think the campaigning starts next year, and it will cover roads like the South Circular, which contributed to my late daughter not being here. And for me, this matter will go on. There will always be an anniversary. This September, Ella's friends will be going to university, and she actually won't be around. And people sometimes ask me, how do you keep going? How do you carry on? Well, I have other children, as people know. And also, if this saves one child's life, then it is definitely worthwhile.
Frank, you talked about research showing that the UK can achieve the interim targets by 2030. What sorts of policies and changes are needed to do that, to get there?
So, first of all, it's understanding what the sources of the pollutants are. And I think, you know, most of us are pretty aware of what those are. Now, when we burn anything, fossil fuels in the transport system, the gas stoves in our homes, the energy generation which still uses biomass or coal, and even, unfortunately, agricultural emissions, especially the pesticides which we use in large quantities. All of these lead to the source of the pollutants, which lead to these ongoing health effects. So the policies that are required, so if you think of where most people live, it is usually in cities, and therefore if you're going to have the biggest effect, then you need to deal with the pollution sources in those cities. And London has been doing that for the last 20 years. As you just heard from Rosalind, the ultra-low emission zone is a world-leading policy, which, when it comes to its full fruition, will bring that particular sector under the emissions from that sector under control. Unfortunately, we still have to move beyond that. But with the climate change agenda, the net zero agenda, which involves removing fossil fuel use from society, that will have an enormous benefit also for air quality. And so therefore, I think we're missing a trick here, really, when we talk about our UK leading the world in its climate change issues. We need to join that up with air quality policies as well, and we'll get double benefit from that. So it's very clear what needs to be done. We just need to ensure that there is sufficient leadership, ambition, both at the national level and at local level, to achieve those goals.
And Rosalind, I imagine people come up to you all the time saying, I can't afford to buy an electric car, so what do I do about air pollution, or what can I do? In fact, electric cars, the emissions from their tires alone, from the rubber, can create PM 2.5 pollution. So what do you say to people? What can they do to help now?
Yeah, I think I've actually had Frank talk on this issue to do with brake and tyre work before. So electric cars are part of this solution, but they are not the only solution. I think of late, we've talked about parents taking their children to school, and most, not all, I appreciate that, most primary school children live within walking distance to their schools, and we do try to encourage people to stop idling, stop leaving their engine running. It is actually against the law. One of my recommendations to the minister is, it would be great to have actual national signs everywhere to show this is against the law. We've also discussed wood burning, that we now know how carcinogenic it is, and that should be banned completely. I know the Secretary of State feels as if it is banned, and we have a slight disagreement on that one, because people still continue to burn wood, and I always get worried when people say to me there's such a thing as clean wood, a bit like for a while people felt there were clean diesel. And I know yesterday there was a policy out by the Secretary of State for Transport to encourage people to take more public transport, but again, that is only for a month, and I don't know how much that would change. I feel overall we need more of an investment long-term in public transport. And basically increase monitoring of air pollution, and not just monitor it, but get it out to the public in simple terms that they can understand. And I feel these are things that people can do. And I think one of my biggest asks really is to say to people, if you can choose a different direction rather than walking along a main road, if you can choose a quieter road, please do so. Because I always get worried when I see joggers or runners running on the South Circular. I don't know what Stephen was saying about that. It really worries me when I see them do it. I know they are incredibly fit and they're probably running marathons, but I always look at them and think, well, maybe they shouldn't run across the South Circular. So not everyone can, people live next to very, very huge roads, and not everyone can do that. But if you can, then please choose a quieter route.
And there's a public consultation on now. Is there a way for people who might feel they don't know enough about air pollution but want to express an opinion? Can they do that as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think 10% of the nation has asthma, and that's not including other respiratory illnesses. And recently, Asthma and Lung UK, they have relaunched. They've got a simplified toolkit which people can go on their website. People who have asthma tend to go on Asthma and Lung UK's website. I have to mention here, if you can't get on that website, please go to DEFRA's main website, because the public consultation is actually there. And please fill it in, because people always feel so powerless, like what can they do? This is part of the process for us to get to where we need to get to. But ultimately, I still feel justice hasn't been done. We now know why Ella isn't here. We know as the coroner took his time, it took him over an hour on that day summing up. And as he said, without the illegal levels of air pollution, not only would Ella's asthma not have started, but it wouldn't have contributed to that fatal night. And I just think we need to continue to raise awareness about this public health emergency, and I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning that the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, is going to be releasing a report about air pollution this summer, and that goes to show really the public health crisis this is.
Stephen, the coroner's third matter of concern was directed at healthcare professionals in particular, and at the time of Ella's death, the lack of awareness when Ella went to hospital about the possible impacts of air pollution. What's changed, and what kind of work is going on to address that issue?
Thank you. We did have a summit which the Mayor of London actually called at the Royal College of Physicians about 2 months ago, where we had the Minister from DEFRA, Joe Churchill, present, and we had Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, which was terrific. We also had Rosamond there. And 20 different health organisations were also represented around that table, including the nursing profession. And every one of them were asked a question as to what contributions they were making to address the point we've just raised. And I'm pleased to say that without exception, all of those organisations are now moving to get air pollution onto the undergraduate and the postgraduate training and education agenda. It'll take a bit of time to do that, but it's definitely happening. The President of the Royal College of Physicians is calling for another round table fairly soon to bring together people in the health community who can influence these various decisions to make sure that that is actually happening. So as long as we've got those checks and balances in, that would be excellent. The final thing I would say is that we as health professionals need to be appearing on the stage of our professional societies, putting air pollution higher up the agenda in organisations like the British Thoracic Society or the British Society of Cardiovascular Disease. And we need to make sure that the relevance to the average physician of air pollution is made clear. Because I would like, in a year's time from now, to walk into a primary care setting or my own hospital and see air pollution sitting on the notice boards, along with diabetes and smoking and all the other preventable conditions that we can now manage. And then if that happens, I know we've actually at last penetrated the impermeable.
And it sounds like you're plotting a public health campaign with Rosamond. What would that look like, and what would the goal be to communicate to people?
Well, this is what we now need, because I think the public broadly is aware of air pollution as an issue, but what they're not aware of is how it works and what they can do about it. In other words, it's the educational side that needs attention. And this is where the health community can play a really important role, because they are the trusted messengers quite often. We've seen how brilliant the schools have been, and school teachers and headmasters and parents at schools, in getting the messaging across. We need health professionals to do the same now. So I think maybe after Chris Whitty's report, Rosamond, would be a time to think about launching some form of public health campaign, where we get the public health professionals in this country, along with the specialists and primary care physicians, to come behind the campaign. But we'll need proper organising and proper planning, just as we did with tobacco smoking, which led, of course, to the banning of tobacco smoking in open spaces.
Guy, Ella's case was also about her right to life and human rights. And what was the significance of human rights legislation in the coroner's findings?
Yeah, so, I mean, firstly, the inquest, to the extent that it happened, the full investigation wouldn't have been possible without human rights legislation. So Article 2 of the EU Convention on Human Rights requires there to be a full investigation, which includes the involvement of the family, where it's simply the state's implicated in the death. The coroner found there were grounds that Article 2 was engaged, and that's why we were able to have such a full investigation, and ultimately why the coroner was able to come to the important conclusions that he did. I think the implication of the right to life is the same then as it is now, that where government is aware of the risk to life, something that's within its control, and it fails to take action, then it inevitably opens up the question as to whether the right to life has been breached, and opens up potential litigation against government or against local bodies, which similarly fail. So I think Article 2 is hugely important, the right to life in relation to air pollution.
Thank you. And final question to everyone. We've talked a little bit about this already, but what simple steps would you like people to know that they can do today to tackle air pollution? Frank?
Well, it all starts with understanding what air pollution is. As Stephen said, we need to support public through an education campaign, because ultimately we're all responsible for this problem. It's through our lifestyle choices. So the simple thing that I've noticed is when people understand that when they have a large diesel vehicle that is actually producing a lot more pollution than equivalent of smaller petrol one. So that's a very simple change, and you still have a mode of transport to get you from A to B. If you have a wood-burning stove and you use that regularly, then again that's going to be contributing lots and lots of pollution. not merely to your own interiors, but to those of your neighbours, because the smoke is going up the chimney and it's really affecting the local neighbourhood. So there's lots of simple choices that we can make that really do, as a population, would make a big difference.
Stephen?
Just adding to what Frank says, the thing that made the difference in 1952 with the smog that killed so many people in London, leading to the Clean Air Act in 1956, was the fact that the public demanded it. And politicians at the time were doing everything they could to slow things down and prevent it, because there were so many competing interests, which is what politics is about. And again, I think if we don't get the public properly educated and properly on board here, then obviously this is going to be a long, long journey. But my belief is that they want to be knowledgeable about it. They want to learn about it. And from my standpoint as a health professional, COVID-19 really shone a light on the indoor environment as a place where viruses and chemical pollutants can damage human health. We now need to actually bring all that out into the open so that everybody can be familiar with this and therefore lobby their own members of parliament and also maybe lobby the local authorities to get local changes made. Because without people power, there is no power.
Rosamond?
I think to add to what Stephen said is, despite losing so many lives over COVID, and I've said this time and time again, my heart goes out to all those families who some of them have actually written to me and said to me, I think I finally understand what your daughter went through. One of the few positives that I can think about is during the first wave of the pandemic, when the air was truly clean and people got a taste of what that was like. And we can't suddenly go back to where we were before, because that will be doing an injustice to many. And we should remember that next year will be 10 years that Ella passed away. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but there are other days when it truly does. And it will be a great way to remember her, for the government to actually do the right thing, and that will save many more children like her.
Thank you. And Guy?
Things members of the public can do, complete the consultation, as Rosamond said earlier, there's a tool, I think, on the Asthma and Lung UK website, also Google the Environment Act targets consultation, find the DEFRA page. Local government elections are coming up, write to your prospective councillors, mayoral candidates, and ask them what they can do about air pollution, go on to asking and ask questions there.
Great, thank you very much to all our speakers and to the Ella Roberta Family Foundation, Hodge, Allen and Jones and the Clean Air Fund. Rosamond, did you want the last word?
No, I was just going to say thank you for having us, and these things are incredibly important because people always ask, why do you keep on doing this all the time? And my response is, children continue to die, people continue to get ill. There is more and more research coming out that shows the link between air pollution and health. And this is something that everybody should be talking about. Even COVID showed us in the areas of high air pollution, COVID was more severe. So this isn't something that's going to go away. And no matter what government is in power, this is something that we are going to have to deal with. Thank you.